Well, just put your imagination to it. Would you like to have, at that point, in the beginning of the 1970s, a fully equipped Soviet strategic submarine with nuclear weapons, with the codes, with all the battle plans for the launching in case of war, retaliation, targeting, the communication systems, all of that?
They'd recovered some of the submarine when the secret leaked out and the project had to be abandoned. But they didn't come away empty-handed.
Well, we just picked it off the bottom of the ocean to pull it up. And then it broke part way. We got some of it, and other parts we didn't.
The frailty of human intelligence convinced some in the CIA that technology should virtually replace the spy. The agency developed the SR-71. It flew at the edge of space at over 2,000 miles an hour. But bitter arguments continued between the technocrats and the clandestine operators.
When the technical systems came along, the clandestine people suddenly found they weren't the end-all and be-all. They were only a part of the team. Human intelligence is a very low probability operation. Today, you use the human to fill gaps more than you use it to go out and probe and get all the information on its own. It's a new role for them. They're used to being all of intelligence virtually. That's their concept. They are now a part of a team. And even today, I don't believe they've understood that and become team players.
I heard a lot of chatter after I left well, we didn't need this human intelligence. That was kind of dirty and so forth. What we needed were those nice, clean things up in the sky that did our work for us, but that's nonsense. Certain it is that this technical intelligence is useful, but it doesn't go to the heart of the matter. You can count tanks and guns and soldiers and automobiles and so forth, but what the country is going to do with them is what you really want to know. And you can't get that otherwise than through human intelligence. Always be spies, always have been, always will be, just the way always been prostitutes.
And some will always get caught. This Soviet prison camp housed some of the CIA's most useful spies. Yuri Pavlov helped develop the Soviet Navy's nuclear fleet.
Меня зовут Павлов Юрий Васильевич, 1935 года рождения.
My name is Yuri Vasilyevich Pavlov. I was born in 1935 in Leningrad. I'm a specialist in the field of the use of nuclear energy for the Navy. In 1976, I was appointed one of the members of the Soviet delegation sent to the International Committee on the Safety of Nuclear Vessels. I met this American representative in Montevideo. He said that he had heard a lot about me and that he had flown there directly from Washington to meet me. I was told by him that he knew about my knowledge of the Navy and nuclear reactors, and he suggested that our future cooperation, so to speak, could be of mutual benefit. A couple of days before our arrival back in Leningrad, I had a meeting with another American chap who I'd spotted in Montevideo. I was walking ahead, and he was walking behind me, and I felt him put something in my palm, and it was a notepad. I opened it, and I found a couple of pages which contained a schedule of my meetings or communication plan between me and the Americans.
Pavlov was arrested in Leningrad in 1984 and found guilty of espionage. The KGB also found spy paraphernalia which the agency had given him.
This is a spy's container. This container was prepared by the American intelligence service for Pavlov and was hidden in the park at Ishmailovsky in Moscow. It looks like a piece of charcoal, and inside it there are certain things that are used by agents. Some pills, which you could use in writing, code tables, a number of instructions, which he had to follow to acquire the information and to stay in touch with the CIA. And also, they didn't forget about his hobbies, and they sent him some very rare stamps dedicated to John Kennedy.
Почему-то Комитет государственной безопасности, который вел это мое следствие, они отнеслись...
The KGB, during the investigation, they were too drastic in their measures. Maybe because there weren't many cases going on in Leningrad at that time. I went through everything here. I received injections. I was imprisoned together with criminals. I was beaten up by them. I had my skull broken, and they were beating me all the time. I nearly killed myself. Those Americans who had been involved with me, or who had tried to involve me, had started to involve me in these illegal activities, well, they were executing their own duty. I don't feel anything bad towards them. I am to blame for everything, if there is something to be guilty of.
Most of the discoveries or exposures of the CIA agents in the USSR were due primarily, in the first place, to act of treason on the part of one of the CIA officers. He was Lee Howard. When he was fired, he approached the Soviet authorities in Europe and then became a spy for the Soviet KGB.
Edward Lee Howard was a CIA officer. In 1983, he failed a lie detector test and was fired from the agency. 2 years later, he defected to Moscow. His work for the KGB began in 1985. He evaded the FBI, fled to Europe, and made contact with the other side.
The Lee Howard revelations made it possible for the KGB to arrest almost a dozen American spies in the USSR. So he provided all the necessary data. I'm not sure about the names, but at least he gave enough clues to find these people and have them arrested. So Tolkachev is one of those examples.
Adolf Tolkachev was one of the Soviet Union's leading experts on radar technology. He had been one of the CIA's top spies. In this film, taken by the KGB, we see the moment of his arrest in July 1985. For years, Tolkachev had supplied the CIA with technical details of the Soviet Air Force.
This is the shopping list they sent to Tolkachev. They wanted to know various characteristics of MiG planes, technical classifications of MiG-23s, MiG-19s, Yak-47s, and detailed reports on radio frequencies during peace and wartime. Also about signals communications for intercepting planes. So the American intelligence service was really interested in all such information. And this information led to Tolkachev being given a camera and lots of money, and every whim of his was fulfilled. American intelligence wrote this in a letter to Tolkachev. Enclosed, you will find a bag with 100,000 rubles. That's your salary up to 1985. And also 2 books for your son, and German equipment for those bad teeth. So basically you can see that he was asking for mere trifles. And these were supplied by the American intelligence service.
Tolkachev was sentenced to death and executed. In contrast, technical intelligence operated without risking lives. In the late 1980s, as Warsaw Pact troops withdrew from Eastern Europe, the CIA monitored activity with satellite-controlled listening devices.
The electronic was so good, so modern.
The electronics were so good, so sophisticated, that the vibrations could be recorded, and they could tell how heavy a vehicle was, whether it was a car or a lorry, and whether that lorry was loaded. The electronics were also in position to tell which direction the vehicles were traveling in, and how many there were over a given period. This device could also encode the information into a satellite system, capable of transmitting the information direct to the headquarters of US intelligence. I think the CIA depends very greatly on technology, and is perhaps a little infatuated with it. They would rather spend money on this than doing something that was politically risky.
Etwas zu riskieren, was politisch zurückschlägt.
Back in Langley, spies had something of a revival. When the Soviet Empire crumbled, the director of Central Intelligence was William Webster. He presided over an agency whose task had changed. It became less a question of how to acquire information and more how to interpret the flood available.
The National Technical Collection is still very important, but so are open sources now. There are 200 newspapers in the Soviet Union that weren't in existence, say, 5 years ago, and we're reading them often before the Soviet citizens themselves have an opportunity to read them. Many of our business people, scientists and so forth, now have access. All of that's important. In fact, overabundance of information is going to be one of the challenges. Make sure that our computers can sort out those things we need and not be bogged down by the hundreds and thousands, indeed millions of bits of information that are coming in. I still see a role for the clandestine collection of intelligence, which in the past has been the best gauge to assess intentions and capabilities. Always the intelligence community, the intelligence officer, the DCI, the president would like to know what's in the mind of his adversary.
Because the Soviet Union had been their principal target for so long, CIA analysts found it hard to accept that the Soviet Union could collapse. Some insiders believe that they got the end game very wrong.
They would get, unfortunately, very mediocre grades. They exaggerated the size of the Soviet economy. They underestimated the Soviet defense burden on the economy. They were very slow to pick up on Soviet retreat from the Third World and the Soviet strategic retreat in general. They were very slow in the political area to understand that Gorbachev was very different from his predecessors. And I think on those areas, proper warning was not given to policymakers by the Central Intelligence Agency. In fact, the best analyst was a British journalist, Timothy Garton-Ash, and I relied quite heavily on his work that was very well known in the United States and was far superior to what the intelligence community was producing at the same time.
The Director of Central Intelligence is also the head of an intelligence community that includes the CIA, the FBI, and the military. Rivalry for the president's ear was intense and often affected intelligence conclusions. The CIA was charged with failing to predict the attempted coup in the Soviet Union in August '91.
There will be critics of the estimates of the Soviet Union. It's easy to make broad brush statements about you really never had it right. My sense of it is this, that the basic trends were well analyzed and well reported. Predictability is not always a strong forte of any intelligence agency. For instance, the coup, the attempted coup, there was reporting on that that projected that possibility, and even, in fact, on the Saturday before the coup, we were able to put on the president's desk some substantial reporting suggesting that the hard-right people were desperate to avoid the signing of the treaty. Now, we didn't say there's going to be a coup on Sunday night, and I don't think that that is the function of intelligence. I think it tends to trivialize intelligence to say that that kind of prediction is what we're all about.
In the Cold War between the West and the Soviet Union, it was in the end no contest. Communism fell on the sword of its own contradictions.
The great experiment we tried to put into life, the communist experiment, failed. The experiment failed miserably. So it was not the CIA's victory, it was the victory of common sense.
There were victories and defeats on both sides, but the CIA is the organization that survived.